Her name is Jeske Hoogeboom. She is the third-year bachelor student following an additional honors program in biomedical sciences at the University of Amsterdam. And currently she's doing her internship at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. She does this on sensory sensitivity in autism at the level of the neuronal networks and by the usage of EEG. Her main question is, does an imbalanced neuronal network show symptoms of affected sensory sensibility? Also, since the hypo and hypersensitivity is kind of a new characteristic of autism in the DSM-5, it's important to study these differences on a neuronal network level. So she's going to tell you a bit more about this in a next talk. Give her give her a big applause. Yes, Hoogeboom. Thank you.
Okay, so first, thanks for having me, Synapsium, and welcome everybody. I'm going to talk about my project, which is entitled Imbalance in Excitatory-Inhibitory Transmission in High and Low Sensitive ASD Patients. My supervisors on this project are Tinka, Ricarda, Klaus, and Sonja. Oh, okay. Okay, first I want to tell you something more about the project itself. It's a collaboration of the CNCR and the VU Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Sciences, both located in Amsterdam. And something about me, I'm a third-year bachelor student in biomedical sciences at the University of Amsterdam. I did my minor in neuroscience and currently I'm doing my internship on this project at the VU University. An overview about something I want to talk to you about this day is some concepts of sensory sensitivity and ASD in general, and the uses of EEG in this study of excitatory and inhibitory balance, and how we selected our participants, and some preliminary results about this project. And on the end, I want to brainstorm a bit with you about this project. The results are too premature to share, so I ask you please not to. Then some more about autism. Autism spectrum disorder is a relatively frequent neurodevelopmental disorder, which is highly heritable, but although it's thoroughly studied, the precise etiology is yet unknown. 1 million children worldwide get a diagnosis with autism, and this diagnosis is characterized by stereotype patterns of behavior, impairments in communication, and reciprocal social interaction. And recently, the DSM-5 got extended, but that the characteristics of that atypical sensory sensitivity is now also a characteristic of ASD. And sensory sensitivity can be divided into hyposensitivity and hypersensitivity, where hyposensitivity means that there's an underreaction to the presentation of sensory stimuli, and hypersensitivity means that there's an overload to stimuli. And this sensory sensitivity can be measured by a questionnaire, which is called the Sensory Perception Quotient, short as SPQ. And this is divided into 5 subdomains called auditory, visual, olfactory, touch, and gustatory. And it is scored by a 4-point Likert scale, where 0 means strongly agree, 1 agree, and up to 3 strongly disagree. And participants have to score how much they agree or disagree with statements, and then the score gets summed, and where a lower score means a higher sensitivity. Something more about recent studies. It is theorized that there is an alteration in neural excitation and inhibition in patients with autism compared to controls, and we call this neural excitation and inhibition the EI balance. And the majority of these studies suggest that excitation is increased over inhibition in patients with ASD. And here we see a panel where excitation and inhibition balance is shown. And in the middle, we see a balanced excitation and inhibition, like in control groups. And in the low, we see that inhibition is increased, so the spiking of the neuron is also decreased. And in the high, we see that excitation is increased, so the spiking per neuron is also increased. And these are all neuronal networks. And it is supposed that ASD functions via the high excitation mechanism. So, these balanced EI interaction can be visualized by EEG, because when excitation and inhibition are interacted, then gamma oscillations occur, and these can be visualized by EEG during an eyes closed resting state. So when gamma oscillations are linked to this EI balance, a disturbance in this balance should be shown symptoms of sensory sensitivity. And this brings us to our research question, where we question of increased gamma activity is positive correlating with sensory sensitivity, which is leading to an increased excitation over inhibition in neural networks. To do so, we made a setup where we collect participants from the Netherlands Autism Register, which is a database with over 2,000 self-reported ASD patients. When we do so, when they sign up, they are asked to fill in the SPQ questionnaire to score for sensory sensitivity. And when we invite them to the VU psychology department, we perform an EEG with eyes closed resting state for about 5 minutes. Then we perform a fast Fourier transform to obtain frequencies, and we tend to correlate those relative gamma power, to the SPQ scores with help of NBT analytics. And in the end, we try to link the outcome to the EI balance. So first we selected our participants from the NAR database on whether they had completed the SPQ and the AQ, and by this all the children were already excluded, because the NAR database consists both children and adults. And the AQ stands for a questionnaire where you can measure if one has autism or not in a quick way. After that, we only selected participants between the age range of 18 and 55, and the patients with an AQ cutoff score of 70 or higher. Also, we want to make sure that we have a high functioning group, so we want to make sure that the IQ is around average or above average, and the amount of people tested until now is 15. So some more about the procedure. The participants came to the lab and were seated in a comfortable chair 80 centimeters from the screen where instructions were shown. They were sitting in a soundproof room, shielded by a Faraday cage to stop interfering signal from outside. They got 64 electrodes placed on the scalp, and 4 additional electrodes around the eyes to track eye movements, so which we can remove later on, and 2 electrodes on the ear as references. So here we see some first results where we see the SPQ scores. On the x-axis we see the SPQ scores of the participants from N15, and here we see the density, which is the amount of participants reaching such an SPQ score. And as we selected for hypo and hypersensitive persons, we see here the hypersensitive group and here the hyposensitive group, because a lower SPQ score is a higher sensitivity level. So that means that we selected our participants in the right way. But although we can see that there's no extreme cases in the SPQ score, because the scores are not in a wide range. So then some results on the measurements of the EEG linked to the SPQ scores. We measured the relative power of the gamma frequencies, and here you see a topo plot on the left side and a regional plot on the right side, where we correlated the relative gamma power and the SPQ scores. And yeah, the rho stands for correlation, where a darker red means a greater correlation, but unfortunately there's no significant results here. So there's no significant correlation between the SPQ scores and the gamma activity. But we see that the most correlation is yet in the frontal regions. And we also did a test on where we selected both groups in hypo and hypersensitivity to look for differences between those groups. And yeah, on the x-axis you see the hypersensitive group, and on the and the hyposensitive group. And on the y-axis you see the relative gamma power. And what is seen is there's also no significant difference between those groups in sensory sensitivity collected to the gamma oscillations. But what we see is that the hypersensitive group is actually more heterogeneous than the hyposensitive group. So when we look at the results, we see that we see the hypo and the hypersensitive participants in the SPQ scores. So we selected for the right participants. And we also see that there's no significant correlation between the relative power and the SPQ scores in both the topo plot and the regional plot. Also, we see that the highest correlation is in the frontal regions, and that the hypersensitive group is more heterogeneous than the hyposensitive group. So our conclusion is about that gamma activity does not significantly correlate with sensory sensitivity in this sample. But yeah, there's some limitations on this research that I'll discuss, because we, for now, only tested 15 people, and this could be expanded in the next months. And also we saw that there were no extreme cases of sensory sensitivity in the hypo and the hypersensitive groups, because we only tested people who were close to the middle, because we're going to extend it as the research goes on. And also we included people on medication, although it might influence the sensory sensitivity of the patients, but we wanted to make sure that we had a group who faces reality, because in the population of ASD participants, there are people on medication and there are people who are not on medication. So when we look if the results match our findings, recent findings, we have to mention that this is exploratory research, so there's not such research done before on sensory sensitivity in ASD. But earlier mentioned alteration in EI balance is not seen in the hypo and hypersensitive ASD group, which was seen compared to controls. So that means that the disturbance in the EI balance does not explain symptoms of sensory sensitivity in this group. Although we saw that the hypersensitive group was more heterogeneous than the homogeneous hyposensitive group, and it could be a start of the defining characteristics for those groups, maybe. And yeah, that's what I want to end my presentation with you, and maybe you can elaborate on those heterogeneous or homogeneous groups. And yeah, any questions, comments, or suggestions are very welcome. Yes, you.
Did you look up only at gamma oscillation or also other frequencies?
The question is if I only looked at gamma oscillations or other frequencies, and we actually only wanted to look at the gamma oscillations because we were interested in the link between the excitation-inhibition balance. But yeah, no, so we didn't really actually look at difference.
Yeah, but in general, like lower frequencies are also associated to top-down mechanisms. So basically it's the modulation of excitability in sensory regions. So it might also be interesting, since I think you have the data, you only have to filter it differently. Also to look at other frequencies to see if there are any imbalance also in other frequencies than gamma. And for gamma, you could also think of like splitting the range, because actually I think there are some studies showing that the effects of altered gamma are only in, if I remember, like higher gamma but not low gamma. Yeah, it's very broad, right?
We got the when we looked at the gamma range, we took the interval from low gamma to high gamma to expand the whole range. So we didn't make a difference between low gamma and high gamma because we included them both. So if that answers your question, yeah, we could look at other frequencies as well. We did, and I saw some kind of significant results, but it was not, according to my question, so I didn't include it in the talk, or yeah, that's why actually. Okay. Yes?
So you mentioned your sample size is a limitation, but did you do a power analysis beforehand to like sort of...
No, we didn't, because I started my internship and then we just wanted to test as many patients as possible in the limited time, and yeah. So yeah, 15 was really the most we can get in this amount of time, so yes?
And are you also considering of making two groups with people on medication and without?
Yeah, I considered it, but we made a table with all those information on which medication and what mechanism it was. And when we look at medication and its working mechanism, only oxazepam is really affecting the EI balance, and there was only one participant on oxazepam, so it wouldn't make sense to make two different groups with one person and then 14 others, so I thought I would let it out. Any more questions? Or? Okay. Then I think it's it.